You're listening to the Voices of Recovery podcast. This is a special episode featuring a recovering addict. Hi, my name is Sophie X. I'm the host and producer of the Voices of Recovery podcast. I'm joined here by Eddie D. Hi, Eddie. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for doing our readings for the Just for Today and for the SPAD. So you're on our special series of our predecessors for the month of August. You're actually closing out the month for us. And I wanted to get a bit of insight and perspective from a person who has been clean over 44. Yeah. So you're going to be at
44, yeah.
closing in at 45 pretty soon, and that's nearly half a century. And that's very impressive, first of all, to have been in recovery for that long and to have stayed clean. You have an important perspective from NA from the beginning, right? So tell us a little bit about who is Eddie D, how you came to recovery, how you stayed in the early days of NA.
So I came to recovery when I was at wit's end. I had no more enablers. I was living in Queens, Elmhurst, Queens, New York. And I knew one person who had gotten clean, actually, two people who had gotten clean. And back in 1980, getting clean just wasn't anything that was on the table for anybody. It was never discussed. There weren't rehabs. There were long-term facilities like Phoenix and Samaritan, and where they kept you for years, and all you heard was bad stories about it. Nobody ever got clean when they left there anyway. And so it really wasn't anything that anybody ever talked about. So somebody I knew ended up in AA, and then somebody else I knew that I was bartending with followed her into AA, and they had a relationship. And I bumped into that guy on the street and he said he was clean, she was pregnant, and they were having a baby and everything was fine. And I was like, blew me right out of my socks that somebody was actually living that way that I knew
And could get clean, yeah.
and could get clean. And he had about a year. She had about 2 years and he had about a year and a half. And that's like a long story in itself. But so he gave me his phone number and said, give him a ring if I ever wanted what he had, basically. And I was about 6 months later, I gave him a ring. And I had been high all that time. And so I called him up and got high and went to the meeting. And the meeting turned out to be a meeting called Both Sides of the Coin, which met in Elmhurst General Hospital. It was a dually addicted Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. And that's where I went to my first meeting. And so I bartended right around the corner from that meeting on 82nd Street in Jackson Heights. So I knew a lot of the people at the meeting. To me, it was a real neighborhood thing. It was, people I knew from the street or whatever, people from the bar, a couple of guys I got high with, their parents were there. It was just surreal in a way. But everybody was clean. And I was the youngest person at the meeting. I was 25. They were all about at least 10 years or more older than me. And I knew some of them by reputation as being crazy people in the neighborhood. And I knew my soon to be sponsor, Bob, and his wife, Annie. And I started going to meetings there. And when I had about 90 days at a business meeting there, this guy, Terry R., brought up at the business meeting that he wanted to start a Narcotics Anonymous meeting. And
So this was still formally an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting that you were
yes,
attending.
Narcotics Anonymous in New York did not exist yet. There wasn't
Hmm.
one meeting anywhere. And I never heard of it, didn't know I needed it.
But this was a special meeting for people that were also addicted to things outside of alcohol as well.
Well, yes, at that period of time, there was a lot of controversy in Alcoholics Anonymous about addicts, letting addicts in, share at meetings, blah, blah, blah. So if you were an addict and you went to an AA meeting, well, most AA meetings, I can't speak for all of them, but there were a lot of people there, sort of like, you could go there, but if you were too boisterous about using drugs or behaving in a certain manner that alcoholics really didn't behave in, they would have a problem with that. Sometimes it got like bad.
So it felt like sometimes people weren't necessarily welcomed with their entire addiction, right? And the
Exactly.
manifestation of their disease.
Exactly. I didn't have those issues because I'm like, I drank all the time also, and when I drank, especially the last few years, I'm basically fall down, snot slinging, blackout drunk, So,
Real bad.
I fit right in. But for people that had a single addiction to like heroin or something, it was very hard to be accepted in Alcoholics Anonymous. So anyway, the addicts in Alcoholics Anonymous got together in Queens and started this group called Both Sides of the Coin. They called it a duly addicted Alcoholics Anonymous meeting where addicts could come and share freely and openly about their addiction and not hear any crap about it, right?
And
So,
still reading AA
yeah,
literature.
so it was an AA meeting. Yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely. It was 100% listed in the AA
Meeting
meeting list
lists.
that that's what it is. But on the other hand, a lot of AA groups didn't accept members of that group
In the fellowship.
in the fellowship, openly and lovingly. It was because there was a commitment AA had, and this is probably a year or two later, that I took. It was called the Speaker Exchange Commitment, where you went into the city and you booked speakers to come in and speak at your group, and you would send speakers to their group. And when a lot of the other people with the same commitment found out that I was booking for both sides of the coin, they said, "No, we don't want you to bring speakers into our meeting."
Oh, wow.
So they knew about it, and it was a little difficult to do that. I think that inspired Terry a lot. I don't know how he found out about Narcotics Anonymous, but however he did, he brought it up at our meeting to start an NA meeting.
So Narcotics Anonymous at this point was had been around for a few years in California.
53, it
Right.
started in California with Jimmy K, yeah. And, the modern official version of Narcotics Anonymous. There were various attempts before that, and they just didn't pan out.
So
But
what do you think was the barrier in getting it to a place like a metropolitan area like New York? What took so long, do
Well,
you
in New
think?
York, there were the Rockefeller laws, and it was against the law in New York for addicts to uh,
Congregate?
congregate. There's the word. It was against the law, literally, that you could come in and be arrested if two addicts were congregating together.
Tell
You
me
know,
about that Rockefeller law. What is that?
I
That's the
think
first time ever
I don't know
hearing.
when it started. It was there all through the 70s. It was actually part of that law. It was against the law to be an addict. So back in the day, your question was, what prevented it from starting before? How come, it was like a late bloomer in New York, and that was the reason. So, you know, uh, cops would sit outside of NA meetings looking to see who was in there. Back in the day, I heard, and stuff like that. It had nothing to do with Terry wanting to start the meeting. I'm not sure if Terry even knew that.
About the Rockefeller law?
Yeah, well, I'm sure he knew about the Rockefeller law, but I didn't think it would be an impediment to him
Hmm.
starting the meeting. I think he just felt that we needed a meeting for addicts.
Right.
That's what it was,
A
and
space for addicts
yeah,
to be.
and actually a God thing at the same exact time. Up in the Bronx, the same thing was occurring.
Wow.
There was a group of addicts who were meeting in this guy's Henry house after AA meetings and hanging out and sharing together, and they started back to life up in the Bronx. I mean, when I say the same exact time, like the same week,
Wow.
and depending on whether you're from Queens or the Bronx, you lay claim to the first NA meeting in New York. I think that, but I think God knew better. So anyway, that's a whole nother story. So anyway, that's what happened. Terry asked for support from the members of both sides of the coin to support the NA meeting, and most members did, and most of the members I remember at the first meeting in Queens, which was the awareness group in Jackson Heights, most members from both sides of the coin were at that meeting.
Hmm.
Yeah, and And that's how it got kicked off. Mike, he went to Florida and got some literature because Florida, we found, had NA meetings and brought some pamphlets back and some white books. And that was the beginning of NA in Queens, the awareness group. I think it was in May of 1981.
So basically, you started a meeting out of necessity because addicts weren't necessarily welcomed with their entire manifestation.
In AA, yeah, and there was already a program out there functioning that
Right,
was for addicts, so why not
right,
in New York?
right.
It was probably long overdue,
It seems so. If
but
it took,
yeah, but its time came.
yep,
It was the right time because it was successful.
right.
You know, people supported it. Meeting came to two, and then there were a couple of meetings in the Bronx, and people went back and forth, and meetings grew.
And in speaking to other predecessors, I found that it was sort of like a logarithmic growth, right? Where like, it started off slow, 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 but then all of a sudden meetings started opening up.
It was sort of slow and steady for the first couple of years,
Mm-hmm.
and then crack came,
Right.
and then crack sort of accelerated the amount of people coming into meetings, younger people. It was still mostly an older AA kind of group. My age, I was 25 and older, really. There were very few addicts that came in that were younger than me. Charlie I was 21, I think, when he came in. And there was a couple of people I remember that, but they didn't stay.
You're the second person that's told me about the acceleration of the growth of the program due to crack.
Due to crack and the Impossible Dream Convention, it seemed that after that convention downtown, that the program grew a lot.
Yep.
That those two events, I think, accelerated it. Like by '84, all of a sudden there was a massive influx.
Yeah, Fern said the same thing
Yeah,
actually. The Impossible Dreams convention
yeah,
really made things explode thereafter.
yeah, and crack changed the landscape for the better.
Yep.
Yeah.
Where addiction became much more recognized as a disease because of crack cocaine.
Well, I think it accelerated progression.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're not going to smoke crack, at least most people, for too long before everything falls apart.
Right.
Most crack addicts, a couple of years and it's like they're done. They're not even accepted in the crack houses.
Yeah.
You know, they,
Yeah, it really ravages you.
yeah.
Um, and this is also happening at a time where the AIDS epidemic is also
Well, yeah.
HIV AIDS epidemic
Hmm.
is, ravaging the the world at this point.
Right. AIDS accelerated, yeah, right about that time. Because we had a member, and I'll say her name, Bonnie, from Long Island, who was the first person I knew to contract AIDS and was probably 81. Nobody knew what she had. I don't think it had been identified as AIDS yet. And she deteriorated very quickly. And, because they didn't know, she was in a biohazard ward at the hospital. When you went to see her, you had to suit up in, like space gear and look through an iron door through a window to see her in the room. And she died, and they didn't say after the fact, looking back, they said it was AIDS. And then slowly people started getting it in the rooms, and it was just like, yeah, within a couple of years, it really ravaged Narcotics Anonymous. It was really bad. Yeah.
Yeah, the entire community of addicts really felt that hit. There's very few people that I know who are predecessors who don't know somebody who died of the disease, unfortunately.
Yeah, if you were in NA, you, you knew a lot of people. You could, at least for me, I can't speak for anybody else. I couldn't even share positive stuff at a meeting without feeling like guilty
Right? Because
because,
people are
the
dying.
people just, had this death sentence and, people you knew that, you might have 12 stepped or you knew from out there that came into the rooms. And it was just, yeah, it was a really like, sad time, very sad.
Thank God for modern medicine. There are multiple people in the rooms these days who have had HIV for years and are still kicking.
Yeah, I have some friends that are long-term survivors. Yeah. There were a few people that just somehow their body managed to fight it off. They were studied back in the days, They don't, you couldn't understand why this small community just didn't get, that sick from the disease. A good friend of mine has had AIDS for 40 years,
Wow.
and she was studied back then, and she used to come in and say, I went to the doctor today. I see my T cells were 1,200. I said, higher than mine. It was just amazing. Like, she
That's
just
amazing.
never really got sick from the disease to
That's
this
amazing.
day.
So you've seen through the eyes of a person in recovery the ebbs and flows of recovery spaces, right? The inception of rehabs, different types of epidemic, whether it be crack, heroin, opioid, COVID, right, as a pandemic,
Hmm.
making its way through NA. Can you talk about what it was like to stay clean through those times when people were very easily abusing opiates because you could get it just very easily from a doctor, right? I'm sure that at some point you had some type of pain and could have
Yeah,
easily become addicted.
yeah, yeah. That was well. I mean, one thing I learned very early on, regardless of what's happening, an addict has no choice. If you want to stay clean, you go to Narcotics Anonymous. So whether there's AIDS or opiates or 9/11 or whatever, thing happens to be going on, we still can't take drugs and go to meetings. That's the bottom line of that. But that aside, yeah, NA has had its struggles and it's had its ups and downs because of those situations. But once the program was on a much stronger footing, when the groups became stronger, and when there were more and more people with time around, because and when it began, there really was nobody with time either, or a lot of long-term experience in recovery to help newer people with that. It was like we were very high on passion, but very low on recovery
The
experience.
newcomers are the predecessors.
That's right. That's exactly correct. We're the old timers we never had.
Right.
Yeah. It's really been just a flow. I wouldn't call all of those situation ebbs. They were just realities that had to be dealt with, and
Life on life's terms.
life on life's terms. You're there for the addict with AIDS and any other addict. They come in, they get what every other addict gets. That's great, but you can't take drugs. You go to meetings, get a sponsor, join a group, and that's just the way it works a day at a time, for everybody.
So the message was simple. It didn't really need to be adapted to the different types of things going on outside of the rooms, bringing people into the rooms.
No, not at all. The only adaptation I think happened that should have happened, and it's good that it happens and it continues to happen, is in the basic text. Every decade or so, maybe a little longer, we change the stories to update it, so people, when newer drugs come out and whatnot, using for me was very simple. There was a handful of drugs and it wasn't complicated. Nowadays, it's a very complicated matter. There's all kinds of stuff out there. And so the story's changing the basic text to reflect that, and I like that.
Talk about a little bit about your upbringing, what made you start using, and then what really brought you to your knees.
Well, I don't know what made me start using. I was 10 years old, and I guess other 10-year-olds I knew were using. And, we all bought a quart of beer and threw up all over the schoolyard and, went back for another quart. At least some of us. No, I did. And I liked it. It seemed to solve a lot of my anger with life issues and other, family addiction shit issues that were going on. And I took to it like, a fish out of water, whatever. A fish takes the water once it's been out of water, whatever that. But I just continued to use, and I can't say if I crossed a line somewhere. I don't think I ever used normally, if there's a way to do that for a 10 or a 12-year-old or whatever. But and alcohol led to pot and led to, it's a gateway drug. I never was a needle user. I didn't use heroin, but I guess I was a garbage head. Whatever walked into the schoolyard, I took, and I started hanging out in bars regularly when I was 14, and in the neighborhood, and shooting pool and drinking, and whatever drugs walked through the bar, I took, and then when I bartended. And so I guess it all ended up after a life of failure at 25. I guess cocaine and speedy type pills at the time, not downs, because that's what the flavor of the day was where I was, and alcohol brought me to my knees. I just society wasn't putting up with my shit as a kid anymore, and I couldn't really take care of myself. I couldn't pay my bills. I ran out of. My family moved from Queens to Long Island and said, "You're not coming with us. You could stay in Queens."
Yeah, you weren't a kid
And
anymore.
I wasn't a kid anymore, and I wasn't. Everybody got tired of being responsible. For me, to some whatever degree, they took that on. And I knew I couldn't take care. Even the people I was using with, some of them didn't want to have anything to do with me. I had a roommate that I lived with for a lot of years that just moved out. And to this day, I don't even know why he resents me. I mean, he got hit with a baseball bat once because of me. Maybe that had something to do with it. But
Maybe.
things like that, and but I never really knew, like, I know it's a lot more than just one incident. But he just, to this day, he won't talk to me. And I don't know what the hell I did. I don't remember, what I did to him. And I feel kind of bad because we were pretty good friends growing up, and so anyway, that type of stuff. That's where I was. I was alone, and I was really sick and tired of being sick and tired of using, and I still use consistently. There was a massive amount of cocaine in Jackson Heights at the time. It was very easy to get. Bartending opened up a lot of doors for me in that area. I was one of the only people that had an apartment that I would have card games with. It was like an after hours bar that never closed, and so that was an avenue for drugs for me, ways and means to get more. And it just, the whole thing ran out of gas. There was nothing left in the tank. Thank God I met Bob, who got clean. I don't know what I would have done. I wouldn't have went to AA on my own. I wouldn't have even thought about it. I don't know what I would have done, really. I went to this meet. Actually, when I went to the meeting with him, I didn't even know it was an AA meeting. I thought it was part of a meeting for the people on methadone at Elmhurst General Hospital. And I figured maybe if I could stop doing coke and pills, I could drink beer on the weekends and I'd be okay. Some shit like crazy thoughts I had. But yeah, that's the way I got to my knees, and I was really crazy at the end of the last couple of months. Like, I tried to sneak on a plane up at LaGuardia Airport, and I get cops brought me. They didn't know what to do with me because I left my wallet. I stashed it somewhere, so they couldn't identify me. So they really didn't know it. It's actually sort of funny. But they brought me to somebody's house where we used all that. I can't believe I brought the cops to that place. But they dropped me off there, and that was a long. But things like that were happening. I went up the where the luggage comes down in the middle of the night and tried to get out in the runway to sneak on a plane. They caught me.
Talk about insanity.
Yeah, it was fucking crazy. I mean, I just you can't live your life that way for too long.
Right?
And that's what happened. So I landed at this both sides of the coin meeting. And those people really took care of me. I mean, they really put their money where their mouth is with recovery. I would probably had to sneak around if just to get high if I wanted to, but I was done. When you're done, you're done.
When you're done, you're done. So, what kept you done, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. The meetings, the principles of our fellowship. That's what kept me clean because they work.
Mm-hmm.
There's no doubt about it. One addict helping another. Addicts show up for each other. They gave me rides to meetings. They took care of me. They called me if they didn't see me, around, things like that. I got a sponsor. I had a strong home group. I went to meetings all the time. Meeting makers make it. That's just a fact in NA that'll never change.
You're still making meetings.
I
I
still make meetings.
see you
Yeah,
at meetings regularly.
yeah. Well, my life works better when I go to meetings. I don't fight that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
When I stop going to meetings, I might not, get high because I missed 3 meetings, but or even feel like using. But I notice if I miss meetings that, for an extended period of time, or, things in life get in the way, and before you know it, it's 3 months since you've been at a meeting. It's not anymore, but sometimes that happened in the past. and you don't feel right about yourself, you know? And I think you're more susceptible to use
Oh yeah.
in those type of situations, whether you think you're immune or not. The time certainly is an immunity to using.
I talk about it as like a balancing scale in my conception of recovery. The more stock I put into my recovery, the harder it's going to be to go back out. The more commitments I have, the more meetings I make, the more contact with my sponsor and my community fellowship, that's what keeps you clean.
Well, it helps. Yeah, it all helps. Um, Eventually, you start putting a price tag on your recovery.
Mm.
When you got a few weeks or a few months, if you're like me, you came in, I had absolutely nothing. No family, no education, no job skills. I mean, I was a blank slate on the board, There was nothing to look forward to, no girlfriend, no anything, no money in my pocket. So after a week of not using, what was it for me to go out and use? I had nothing to lose, right? Well, big deal. What am I going to give up? But after I was here a few years, I was in a good relationship. I had a good job. I was feeling good health wise. I had a future. There were things I wanted to do, like go back to school because I have no education and I regret that. A lot of things, I had a future, which I didn't have when I got here. Now there was a price tag. If I went out and used at that point, I was going to lose all that shit.
Hmm.
That stuff will keep you clean.
And hope, right? And
Yeah,
hope.
I had hope. And one addict helping another. It was the first thing that really put value in my life that I actually saw that, I can have a positive effect on another human being, that I could reach out and genuinely have a heart that cared that that person got clean. When you find yourself sitting in a little basement apartment wherever you live and all by yourself, and you start thinking about your first sponsee, I hope they're doing good. It's Saturday night. I didn't hear from them. You're starting to care about people, in a very positive way. And to me, that was invaluable feelings to help you stay clean. Life had purpose.
That's the most selfless part of this program, right? Is the newcomer and giving the program away to somebody else, and sponsorship. I
Absolutely.
feel like is, one of the things that really cements your recovery. It keeps you clean, right?
Yeah, you build a wall of different things like that that really that's your fight against active addiction of using again. I mean, Charlie I was the first guy I sponsored. He's still clean today, and our relationship is invaluable. He was next to me when my son was born. I was at all his kids' graduations, bar mitzvahs, marriage, all of that stuff. He was in my wedding party when I got married to Meryl. Back in the early days of NA, and I used to sit and wonder, Charlie's so fucking crazy. I hope he didn't smoke fucking dust tonight. Really, in like 1983 or whatever, and he was just a kid. To have somebody that was, well, years younger than I was quite unique in NA back in those days.
So talk about finding that, friendship and love and all these things that you have found in the rooms. Your wife, you said that you met her in the rooms, and she also had some substantial recovery herself and was around for those early
Hmm.
days. Talk about what that was like to be able to, find the love of your life and be able to build a future together with this new way to live for both of you.
Yeah, that was pretty incredible. I was at both sides of the coin. It was Friday night, and she showed up. I think it was her first meeting, and we shook hands. We went to the meeting. It was a diner that we all went to right after the meeting, and I walked into the diner with some friends, and she was sitting in a booth with three guys that were at the meeting. They were all newcomers. I think she met them in rehab actually, and one guy I knew from high school. So I sat down at the booth and I looked over and she was sitting there. And I said to myself, oh shit, that's the girl I'm going to marry. True story. I
No
tell it all the
way.
time. God's honest truth, and I started talking to her, and eventually we went out, and fairly quickly, and we've been together ever since then, really. And uh, she got clean, and NA was just getting off its feet. Everybody had commitments everywhere, and That was our life. We moved in together in Maspeth. I guess it was maybe 84, 83, 84. Actually, it was an apartment that was handed down one attic to another. So we lived there for a while, and NA started. It was getting bigger, and it sort of divided up into little groups, that of friendships. And we had people over our apartment all the time hanging out. It was like a little NA community hanging out. I had a van for work, and we used to go places in the van, and it was just like, it was really nice, actually.
At a time when you had to do a bit of interborough and sometimes interstate travel to make meetings, right? Because there weren't very many meetings around. There wasn't a
Hmm.
meeting every day or multiple meetings
No,
every day.
no. There were meetings over in Jersey. I was never part of that because eventually all the jobs I had weren't 9 to 5. They were like I drove a cab initially, and that was 12 hours a day. And I had this huge fear of being homeless in recovery. So all the money was in my pocket because you got paid cash every day for driving a cab. And I didn't know what to do with it. It just started accumulating in my pocket. And so uh, I drove for like 60 hours a week. And then I got a job pulling telephone cable, a manual job. And I did that during the week, and I still drove a cab on the weekend. So in my case, I really didn't have time to go anywhere to meetings. I just went to local meetings, whether they were AA or NA. Other people traveled up to the Bronx a lot. I went there sometimes, but I really couldn't make those meetings consistently because they mostly grew initially in Queens and in the Bronx. And then a couple of meetings started in Manhattan. I think a meeting in Midtown. Midtown Connection, I think, might have been the first. And Cabrini Hospital had a meeting in Manhattan. There was the Star Group in Brooklyn started. That was the first meeting in Brooklyn. But that was a journey. And who knew Brooklyn if you were from Queens? I mean, anything about Brooklyn was like going to Mars.
At a
But
time
people
when,
went there.
yeah, at a
Yeah,
time when
yeah.
transportation wasn't so readily
No,
available, right?
and there were a lot of people that traveled to all of these meetings back in those days. I just wasn't one of them. I got home. I would go to an AA meeting around the corner from my house. I wasn't, gonna travel that far, and the pulling telephone. A lot of times you had to work. You could work between 9 and 5. You had to work either before or after because the businesses were functioning. You couldn't work there. So I never knew how long I was going to work and, what hours.
So you find the love of your life in recovery, right?
Yeah.
Love at first sight. You're like, oh,
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
one. There she is. And you go from working as a cab driver and pulling phone wires, as you stated, to a very successful business owner.
I learned how to install phone systems. I started out as pulling cable as a laborer. And then slowly over the years I learned the trade. So after about 5 years or so, I was installing the systems myself. And Meryl, I was living with Meryl. We had gotten married. We had a baby. And it was, a new life, like a father knows best lifestyle that I never knew existed. And so that's really what happened. She was a very talented and successful clothing designer who always worked in the clothing industry her entire life since she was like 17. So somebody put her in business to become a division of a bigger company and grow, this division. And so that's how she started in her own business. She eventually owned the division, and I went to work there. I
Mm.
left the phone industry to work there in like probably 1990 or so, and that became successful. That's how it got there.
And your wife is also a very strong proponent of service in the NA community. She has done a lot of service. I have heard her name left and right and left and right,
Yeah,
talking to other predecessors. And she's also very integral in your story of recovery, right?
absolutely.
Growing a business together, working together, having children, having grandchildren,
Yeah.
right? So, what do you think is probably the most important facet of recovery between the two of you, would you say? I know you share a home group. I've seen you both at. a home group together.
Yeah, sometimes that becomes difficult. But if I had to put it on one thing, I mean, the obvious answer would be love, but I don't think that's the main ingredient. I think it's respect.
Mm.
You know, respect is a huge thing for addicts. I never had it anywhere in life. You know, people, you know, you get the respect of an active addict. What's that? I really respected her on every level, and I think she felt the same way about me. And I think that's what really allowed us to go the distance
Hmm.
because it wasn't all happy developing. You go in business with your spouse and you see how freaking happy you are most of the time, you know, and we're exact opposites, so we rarely agree on most things in life. And so we've had some real knockdown, drag out fights. And if I had a nickel for every time I said, I'm out of here, I'd be rich today. Something had to carry us past that. And I'm sure she felt the same.
Hmm.
I mean, you know, she said a million times, I don't know how I dealt with him, you know. And so, you know, but we've always had a massive amount of respect for each other. And I think that's super important.
And she had her own journey in recovery, right?
Oh, yeah.
Relapse is part of her story. What was it like to be that sort of rock for her to lean on when she was going through her own challenges? Because you had your own recovery to worry about too, right? I understand that that must have had its own challenges.
Well, yeah, she was extremely committed to her recovery and Narcotics Anonymous.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was she was clean about 20 years and she got diagnosed with Hep C,
Mm.
which came out of nowhere. Nobody knows where. She wasn't a needle user.
Mm-hmm.
She shot dope once
Mm.
on a relapse when she first came around.
Mm-hmm.
And it was with that guy I knew actually in the diner we met. They all went out together and it was the first time she shot dope and he had hep C also. So that's the only place that and a transfusion would be the only two places she could have gotten
Mm.
hep C from. But she got diagnosed with hep C with 20 years. Actually, we were applying for an insurance policy and they came back and said, guess what? And so, anyway, she went on the treatment at the time was the ribavirin and interferon,
Mm-hmm.
which basically drove a lot of people crazy. And
Yeah.
I've seen it.
Oh yeah.
And it drove her crazy. And she had really, really bad effects. And she didn't get any better. And I mean, literally, when I say because we were running a business at the time, she had to take her medicine on the way home from business on Thursday so she could be just barely enough okay by Monday to come back to the office. You know, I used to have to carry her up the stairs, and she was just a mess. Anyway, so because of her severe symptoms, the PA prescribed her, I don't know, some drug that she abused. You know, that one day happens when you take, you know, two instead of one.
It's so easy
It's that easy.
when your health is bringing you to your knees to use something to give you relief, right?
Yeah,
Because her body was its own worst enemy.
right. And then she had, you know, she was really super weakened from the drugs, and you know, now she was just off to the races. Her thing was pills anyway, so that's what she fell right back into.
Mm-hmm.
So with 20 years, she went out and uh, we had bought a house on Long Island a few years earlier in Huntington. My son was, I guess, 10 at the time, maybe or so, and maybe a little younger. But it was difficult, you know, because she was the major part of running the business from the office. I was sort of out in the factories and in the back end of the business, and now she was like starting to not function at
Mm-hmm.
work. Employees were questioning what was going on. She was, you know, using. You know, it's always progressive, so she continued to get worse, and my son was extremely angry. You know, hard to explain mom nodding out in the spaghetti at dinner, you know, to a kid. He knew what was going on. Kids are a lot smarter than we think, you know. And so eventually, yeah, of course, it took its wear and tear on me, and it was very difficult for me because Narcotics Anonymous at the time, we were one of the first couples in recovery, and we were still together. We had a baby, and we sponsored a lot of people along the way.
So you were well known within the community.
Yeah, so where do you go to share? I wasn't going to walk in a meeting and dump, Meryl's grisly shit
Of
just to
course.
get it off my shoulders. So I
And
used,
she's suffering, right?
and she was
It was
suffering.
her health condition that
Yeah,
brought her to this point.
yeah.
It's
People
not like
were
she just
asking me.
decided I'm going
No,
to pick up one day.
no.
She was doing it to get relief because she was.
And actually, the way NA works, now that I think about it, was in complete denial.
Mm,
Anybody else, I would have said, "Oh, they're using." But I couldn't admit that, with her, even though she was nodding out and, acting like an addict. It's obvious. Until my sponsor, Bob, Charlie I, and Brendan, I think, C, were at my house, and I must have all talked this over quite a bit. And they pulled me aside, and she was sort of sleeping by the pool. And they said, Eddie, this isn't her Hep C medication and whatever you're telling yourself. And I said, yeah, I know, you know. And that was when, all you had to do was mouth those words and then it's out there.
yeah.
I was keeping it in. As soon as I admitted it, then it was, what are we going to do about it?
Hmm.
And eventually I just said to her, listen, I can't do this anymore. At work, employees are asking me, why is Meryl asleep in the conference room? Stuff like that. I hadn't even customers call up. There was a customer we had in Jersey who was an account we shipped, and I knew the woman from bartending to Jackson Heights, who was the buyer, and she called me in and said, she knew I was in NA also, and she said, Eddie, you came here because I called you. Meryl was asleep in our conference room in New Jersey. I didn't know what to do with her, and so I talked with her a bit, and I had to go to Jersey and get it. Finally, I said to her, "Look, now my own recovery's in danger,
Right.
and if I use this house, the kid, all of this is going out the window because I'm gonna see to it that it's gone. That's how fucking angry I am,
Yeah.
And then she went to rehab and she got clean. She's been clean ever since.
Yeah, she
Now
has.
she's got like 21 years, I
Yeah.
think she just celebrated back.
Right.
So, it's a lot of NA experience she has.
And it's a miracle, right? Because there are people like yourself who came in and stayed, and relapse gives a very different perspective to a person about it's okay to come back, and
Right,
you can still, count days,
right,
even if you've had decades in the past.
right.
And her story is its own unique perspective. I really hope that we can get her on the podcast so she can.
Well, you really need, if you're going to interview me, you got to interview her.
Of course, yeah.
But
She's the other side of the
she
coin.
struggled with that a lot because, time was a big deal back then. And it was, all her peers we all had the same amount of time within a couple of years of each other, right?
Hmm.
And now she had to go back to square one. But yet our whole social group had been doing the same thing for 20 years, going to meetings and,
Right.
hanging out. And she had to say, I got 30 days, I got 60 days, and she she had a long hard, and I give her a massive amount of credit for
Absolutely.
being able to swallow her pride and and put recovery first again and start from scratch. And she has like an amazing story with that.
It's truly a miracle when people are able to come back after a relapse and they make it back, right? Because
Yeah,
this disease, we know the bitter ends, unfortunately.
yeah.
And so bring us to today. What does Eddie, with 44 going on 45 years clean, do to keep himself in recovery?
Well, I go to meeting. I don't take drugs and go to meetings. But that's NA. If you do that, you work NA perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else is gravy.
Mm-hmm.
Don't take drugs and go to meetings. You're going to be okay. And I know that. And that's what I do. But I love meetings and I love the people at meetings. I don't have to say, oh, I gotta go to another meeting, or like I'm doing 90 an hour. I don't, it's not,
It's not a
I
chore.
really and truly enjoy being around, addicts seeking recovery. Because one of the many things we all have in common is we're all trying to make ourselves better
Hmm.
in our own way, in our own whatever, however we're looking at it. We want our tomorrows to be better than our yesterdays. So we go to NA to do that. And I need to be around people like that. I draw a lot of positive energy, whether you're walking in the door as a newcomer or whether you've been around a long time. We all have I love being around, and it's no matter who's struggling, who's yelling, screaming, who got high yesterday, whatever it is, we're all still looking to accomplish that.
Hmm.
And I love seeing people get better. I keep my eye on newcomers. I watch them stop biting their fingernails and taking a shower, and all of a sudden they come in. And now the day meeting's my home group, and you see newcomers come in there all the time, and you get close to them, and then after a year or so, they're gone. And I know most of those people aren't gone out in the street. They're gone because they got a job and a manageable life,
Yep.
and they can't come to day meetings anymore.
That's my story.
Yeah, there you
It's my
go.
story.
And I love seeing that.
Yeah.
It's just when I go to a night meeting and I see somebody I haven't seen at the day meeting there, it makes me happy. I feel good for them. So where else you gonna go and get that in life? I love Narcotics Anonymous. And I love going with my wife and I love being together with her. Like I always feel good when I leave a meeting and with her, under my arms like we've been doing for the last 40 years. So it just it's embedded in my life. And all of that sounds great, but it's not an immunity to taking drugs again.
Yeah.
I could go out and get high just like anybody walking in the door today.
Corner store, go get a beer. Yep.
Absolutely. And I've known too many people that's happened to. And the scary part is sometimes there's no explanation for it. The honest answer is, I don't know why I took it. I'm an addict.
Yeah.
It's just like
We don't
you
need an excuse
blanked
to
out
use.
and that
Yeah.
was it,
We don't need an excuse to use.
I mean, I don't want to be in that position. And I know I'm capable of that,
Everyone is.
so I just, meetings are our defense against that.
Yep.
Helping another addict is our defense, as best we can do against that and praying to God that, I don't have a 30-second blank out when there's some coke in front of me. Well, you don't put yourself in those positions, but with some opioids in front of me, that, could very well be possible
Yep.
if you're dealing with sick people or
Even
whatever.
something as simple as Benadryl, right? Over the counter medication. You can become so heavily addicted to that,
They
right?
could lead to something else for
Yeah,
sure. You got to be
absolutely.
careful,
Absolutely.
with everything you do. And meetings, a constant reminder. We got this built-in forgetter.
Yep.
And if we're not, well, at least for me, if I'm not constantly being reminded of that, and if it's up front, it fades quickly.
Yep.
And I don't want to be in that position,
Yep.
And I love my life in NA today. I love my life outside of NA. I feel like I belong in the world out there. I
Mm-hmm.
never felt that way when I was using. And for many years in recovery, I didn't feel like that outside world I really fit in. And now I get to be just me,
Yep.
in front of outside, inside, and it's sort of there's a comfortability about that, being numbed out from opioids never gave me. Yeah.
Well, I thank you for doing this service and for sharing your story, for doing the readings for us. And I hope people have this fresh perspective of what it was like to be around in those early days when there wasn't really a space for addict and to have stayed clean and to feel like you do have a place in this world today. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for sharing your story.
Thank you.
Be well,
All right.
Eddie. Thank you. The Voices of Recovery podcast is an independent production of the Works of Wisdom. We welcome your questions and donations via PayPal at voicesofrecoverypod@gmail.com. This podcast is an independent production and is not affiliated with, associated with, authorized by, endorsed by, or in any way officially connected with Narcotics Anonymous or any of its subsidiaries or affiliates. While NA literature may be read during episodes for the purpose of supporting recovery, such use does not constitute an official endorsement or representation by Narcotics Anonymous. In accordance with NA tradition, the NA name is not to be used to endorse or be affiliated with any outside enterprise, and no such endorsement or affiliation is implied. Music is by Sage. Thanks for listening to the Voices of Recovery podcast.